Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is persuade. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or meanings for this verb. The first way we tend to use this verb is to mean to cause someone to believe something. Or, said another way, to convince them to believe something. A second way we use the verb is to provide a good reason for someone to do something. So with both of these meanings, something that's really important is that we are offering a reason or evidence as we persuade. So it's more than just telling someone, do this, or you should do this. I'm saying you should do this because, or you should believe this because, and then I give reasons for it. Persuade is a regular verb. To make the progressive tense, we're going to drop the E and then add ing. The past tense and participle forms of this verb are made by just adding D, since this verb ends with an E. The verb persuade ends with a D sound, duh. So the ed on the ending there is going to make an id sound. Persuaded. Let's take a look at some phrasal verbs next. And normally, as I talk about phrasal verbs, I try and highlight when the meaning shifts. So what you're going to notice here today is our meaning isn't going to change. But I thought it would be important to show you the structure of how we use this verb. So the first phrasal verb we'll look at is to persuade someone of something. And again, this just means you're convincing someone of something. This is generally going to be the belief meaning. And the way we're going to use this verb is we'll figure out what tense, or if we're using it with a modal, but we'll have our verb persuade. Then there's going to be either a person's name or an object pronoun, then of, and then some sort of description, maybe a noun phrase, telling us what that something is. So here's an example sentence. He couldn't persuade me of the truth of his statement. The next phrasal verb we're going to look at is to persuade someone to, and I've noted infinitive here. So if you've studied a lot of English grammar, you know an infinitive is to plus the base verb. And so that's what you're going to see very commonly with this verb persuade, particularly when we're talking about action. So that's our meaning here, to convince someone to do something. And just like the previous phrasal verb, again, we're going to see persuade, then we might see a name or an object pronoun, and then to, and then look for a base verb. Here's an example. They persuaded me to have another piece of cake. Let's continue using the verb persuade in some different verb tenses. Today, we'll look at the present perfect, simple future with will, and we're going to look at a past modal of recommendation. I'll explain more about that in just a couple minutes. First, let's look at present perfect. We use this verb tense to talk about an action that was completed at some indefinite point in the past, or we might use it to talk about something that started in the past and it continues into the present. To make the present perfect, we're going to use has or have, and then the participle form of the verb, which in this case is our just past tense. So let's take a look at an affirmative sentence. Nationwide protests have persuaded many Americans to support police reform. If I want to make a negative sentence in present perfect, I'm going to insert not after have or has. And you might hear native speakers use the contraction form hasn't or haven't. Here's an example. This information hasn't persuaded him to change his views. Finally, if I want to ask a question in the present perfect, I'm going to start with have or has, then I'll have my subject, and then the participle form of our verb. Have we persuaded you to wear a mask? Next, let's take a look at simple future. And today, we're going to practice simple future just using will and our base verb. And the nice thing about using will is that it's going to stay the same no matter what the subject is. Let's take a look at an affirmative sentence. Misinformation online will persuade millions of people. If I want to make a negative sentence in simple future, I'm going to use will not and then my base verb. You might hear native speakers use the contraction won't. Here's an example. You won't persuade them to play soccer. Finally, if I want to make a yes or no question in the simple future, I'm going to start with will, then I'll have my subject, and then the base verb. Will the cash reward persuade someone with information to speak up? Next, let's take a look at a past modal. If you watched yesterday's video, you saw that I talked about a past modal of ability. And we practiced using could have and the participle form. And there we were kind of reflecting back into the past. I mentioned yesterday this type of statement is sometimes called a lost opportunity, a verb tense of lost opportunity. And I like that, if we could go back in time, right, what would we do differently? So today we're going to practice using should, have, and then the participle form of the verb. And when we do this, we're sort of reflecting on what we know now and what we wish we would have done in the past had we known. So let's take a look at an affirmative sentence. The health crises in other countries should have persuaded the U.S. to take COVID-19 more seriously. So again, if we could give advice to our government, to our leaders in the past, this might be something we would have said. If I want to give and make this negative, right? So it's telling someone I should not have done something in the past, right? I'm going to follow that pattern there. Should not have, and then the participle form of my verb. Here's an example. Politics should not have persuaded lawmakers' response to COVID-19. Finally, we'll look at a yes or no question. To do this, we're going to start with should, then we'll have our subject, then have, and the participle form of the verb. Here's an example. Should we have persuaded them to go for a walk with us? One thing to note, particularly in the affirmative, is many native speakers are going to shorten the two words should have, and sometimes it might sound like shoulda. So in case you maybe hear coworkers or other friends use that statement, what they're saying is should have. Finally, let's take a look at some words that are related to our verb persuade. The first word is a noun, persuasion, and it is the action or fact of persuading someone or of being persuaded to do or believe something. So here's an example sentence. The art of persuasion is an important skill for a salesperson. So what this is saying is someone who's in the business of selling things, right, should be good at persuading others, convincing them to act, convincing them to buy things. An adjective form of this word is persuasive. And generally, it means good at persuading someone to do or believe something through reasoning. Again, this is more than just telling someone they should do something. You're telling them why. So here's an example of persuasive. All students need to write a persuasive essay. So this adjective gets used in a number of academic or classroom settings. So in speech communications, you might be asked to give a persuasive speech. And it's very common in writing to also practice this skill of trying to convince someone to think a particular way or to get people to act a different way. Another adjective connected to this verb is persuadable, and what it means is easily persuaded. So here's an example of that. Do you think they are persuadable voters? Here in the United States, we're just over 3 months away from a presidential election, so that's going to be in the news a great deal, and I think you might hear this word used to describe potential voters. Can they be swayed from voting for one candidate to another? There are some people that are very confident. I have made up my mind, and you cannot convince me to vote for the other person. And that connects to our next word, unpersuadable, right? So that UN prefix is telling us not. So this means not persuadable. Here's an example sentence. How do you persuade the unpersuadable? Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.